So for this example, what we're seeing is an application that just fetches the source code for any website. So if you put in google.com, it actually fetches it and gives you the source code for whatever web page that we've given it. But for us to make sure there's an SSRF here, the first thing we want to do is we want to spin up a Netcat. You can use Burp Suite. I'll show you both. But for Netcat, we cover this in our how to set up your own lab section of the course. But what we're doing with Netcat is we're telling it, hey, I want you to listen and open on port 8000. So now that we have a port 8000 open, I know the IP address for my box. So I'm going to put that in here and I'm going to make an HTTP request. And I'm going to hit port 8000 because that's the port we opened up here. And we want to see who's making the request. Is this being made on the server side or is it being made on the client side? So client side being my browser. If my IP address shows up in the request, that means my browser is doing this and not the server itself. As you can see here, the IP address that's coming back is 142.93.35.49. I know my personal IP address and I know that's not it. So that's the IP address that belongs to the server. So what we can do next is we know that the request that's being made is from this IP address. This is not ours. This is the server's. So it means there's something in the background, some work that's being done by the server. It's rendering and fetching data on the server side. And now I want to start messing with it. Now we want to see if we can actually access any local networks or any other sensitive data that could give us some sort of impact. So the first thing we can do is we can use a file wrapper. We can say, hey, use file, give me the Etsy password content. That was pretty easy. In this case, it came back. This is still very, very common in bug bounties, where it comes back and says, okay, here's the data you asked for, and it's easily giving it to us. If that doesn't work, we can also look for localhost. So every machine that's running some sort of a web server could be accessible within its own machine and network by going to localhost. So if you're not familiar with this, I highly recommend looking into it and getting familiar with how private networks work, what is a localhost, or even going as far as setting up your own localhost with some Apache and MySQL in the background. For this case, we're going to give it localhost. That comes back, it says status okay, which means that we're accessing a local private network that wouldn't have been accessible without this SSRF. Again, we also talked about in SSRFs, the most important thing that a lot of hackers go after, especially with bug bounties, is looking for metadata. So the first step to do is we want to go to 169.254.169.254. This is a universal IP address that most cloud service providers offer. It just gives you some metadata. In some cases, it might give you keys. It may give you some extra information that you can use as a part of your POC. So in this case, we hit this first URL. It comes back and says not found. We're going to try and do metadata v1. And this comes back and gives us some data, so we can actually query for additional information like the public keys. We can look for the DNS information. Again, these are metadata. In some cases, there are keys available where you can actually use them for AWS or whatever the cloud service instance provider is, and you can get additional access and escalate your privilege to doing more like an RCE from your SSRF.